I'll go back just a little bit into the 7 churches again. I'm just going to show you a pattern again. Remember I was showing you patterns in the 7 churches? He would say, to each church, these things says he who holds the 7 stars, or these things says he who is dead and was raised again. This says he who has the sword from his mouth, and so on. Each church had a revelation of Christ.
Okay.
Then in the middle of the church, you would see how he would deal with the problems in each church with the revelation he spoke at the beginning of the church. So you've got the beginning of each church as a revelation of Christ. Then in the middle of the message, you see him actually manifesting the solution. One of the churches, he says, he who has the sword from his mouth, he says, I will come and deal with Jezebel with the sword of my mouth. So the beginning of the church, then in the middle of the message, what he introduced himself as is the revelation of Christ to deal with the problem in the church. I was studying, and you know how I love word studies, so I noticed that at the end of each church, the 7 churches, he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. That phrase is exactly the same phrase in every church. At the end of what he's saying, he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Now, I want you to note, he's speaking to one church at a time. Why doesn't he say it like this? He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to this church.
It applies to all of them.
Because it applies to all of them. He doesn't say what the Spirit says to this church. He's saying that this message in this church, and then the next church, and so on, we need to understand these messages spiritually. What the Spirit says to the churches. The whole book of Revelation, at the very end, he says to John, write this all down and send it, the whole book, to all 7 churches.
Sure. Because if it only applied to one, he'd have to separate it all out.
Yes. It's not like, send a letter to Ephesus, then send a different letter to Pergamum, and send a different letter to Laodicea. See, no. The same message to all 7 churches. I started going through the whole book of Revelation and noticed that at the end of each message, he has this phrase, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Then he says, to him who overcomes. And then, to him that overcomes, I will, in one church, he'll say, him who overcomes, I will give to eat of the tree of life. Next church, he says, he who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. You see that? Overcome. Next church, to him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. You get a reward by overcoming.
Yeah.
He who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him will I give power over the nations. He will rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessels. Now, that is a direct quote from Psalm 2, verses 8 and 9. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. What that tells me is that we're not just reading a vision from Christ to John for a particular group of people. This is also fulfilling the Word of God. because he's quoting the Word of God. Just like he did in his parables. Within his parables were quotes from the Scriptures. This stone will grind you to powder. See? Daniel chapter 2. Here again, he is saying, he who overcomes keeps my works unto the end. To him will I give power over the nations. And he quotes Psalm chapter 2. Chapter 3, verse 5. Here it is again. He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments. And there's more promises there. I'm just trying to show you there's a theme. It keeps popping up. Next church, Revelation 3:12. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. Now, do you see what would happen if you literalize this? What's going to happen to this guy that becomes a pillar? If you literalize it. Is he going to stand there as a pillar for the rest of eternity? I'm a pillar.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
No. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. What does a pillar do?
Hold things up.
Holds things up.
Supports.
Supports. Revelation chapter 3, verse 21, the last church. To him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. To him who overcomes, as I also overcame. So it says here that Jesus is speaking these words, as I also overcame, and my reward is what? To sit down with my Father on his throne. I think I'll end it there.